What's up, everyone? Welcome to the Life Livers Academy. I'm Jamie O Donnell, and the purpose of this podcast is to connect you with the people, ideas, mindsets, and inspiration to empower you to chase your dreams, unlock your potential, and live life to the fullest each day. Get ready for some inspiring conversations and incredible insights from people who are out there living life, having fun, and dominating their chosen path. I appreciate you tuning in. Now let's get this episode underway. Rightio, got an old friend of mine, James Marshall, with me today. Professional rugby player, played for the Hurricanes, spent a fair bit of time overseas, and is a true Nelsonian Tasman Marco boy. James, thanks for joining me, bro. Really excited to dive in and have a chat.
Hey, thanks for having me on. I've been just started this podcast sort of business as well. First time I've been on the other side of the mic, so really looking forward to it.
Let's see how we go then.
Yeah.
Hey, first things first, it's a crazy time out there at the moment for all industries, but particularly for rugby. What's it been like being in camp through the coronavirus stuff, and what's happening? Obviously, you're signed with the Hurricanes at the moment. What's it like behind the scenes? What's the feeling like? We're about to get back to playing some rugby. How has that transition been over the last couple of months of trying to function in professional sport, but obviously been able to do very little?
Yeah, it was a mad couple of months, to be honest. Like from the first sort of case, we had some sort of preparation meetings around how we're going to deal with this if it happens, and then it obviously happened, and it all went into full lockdown. So that was a very unique situation where all the players are trying to maintain their fitness, skills and stuff from their own home, not being allowed to leave the house. So it was such a unique situation. We're trying to do like catch up with guys on Zoom calls and like keep our connections, but it was all very sort of, such a strange situation to be in. And now coming to the end of it, it's sort of done a real quick swing around where we're now looking at playing next weekend with crowds, and we're basically back into business. So it's been a crazy couple of months.
How have they managed to like keep the team culture? Because I imagine that as part of being like when you're building towards a season, a huge focus. Obviously, you want fitness and strength and conditioning, and you've got all your tactical stuff that you're working on, but a massive part of it is obviously building that team culture and the connection with new guys coming in and stuff. How have they managed that?
Well, basically they just tried to keep those connections with the Zoom calls and stuff, which weren't quite the same, but I think everyone sort of missed each other's company so much that when we came back together, that everyone was just so happy to see each other that the connection, we didn't lose too much of a connection, and the way we're building towards this first game is everyone's pretty excited and just really looking forward to playing rugby, because when it's taken away from you so suddenly, that you sort of have this new appreciation for your job and what you're doing.
Yeah, what's that been like for you? Obviously, you're out with an injury at the moment. You've just had surgery.
Yeah.
But I think I've been watching I follow a lot of professional sportsmen online, and I'm pretty fascinated in the behind-the-scenes side of things. What's it been like to stop and not have sport, and to actually have to face up to the fact that it's quite vulnerable and that there's a whole big world outside of sport? Has that been like a scary thing to face up to, or how's that been?
Yeah, well, it's something I've been thinking about, honestly, throughout my whole career. Like, you've got these player development people through all your teams you have, and they're always asking you, what do you want to be when you finish? And something that you don't really know. And even when you go to like sponsor events, you meet sponsors and they say, oh, what do you want to do when you finish rugby? Because you're not going to be doing rugby for much longer. And you're like, oh, yeah, I don't really know, but I've got a lot of things that I want to do, but how do I start doing that while I'm still playing? And it's quite a awkward transition. Like, there's a fair bit of anxiety around it, like making that transition. And I know a lot of people who really struggle with it, but I mean, this little break for me, where I've got 12 months towards the end of my career to try different avenues, is gonna be massive for me to sort of see what I want to do, try some things, and if they work, they work. If they don't, I know that, and I can go on to something else. But it's definitely an area where every rugby player is going to come to at some point, and the way people deal with it's going to be different by how well they prepare for it.
Yeah, it's funny because obviously you've just started your podcast as well. It feels like there's a big transition towards athletes starting to take their brand seriously and starting to look at what they can leverage outside of the game to build a career for themselves beyond that. Obviously, Artie's got his podcast running, and he's kind of leading the way for a lot of the New Zealand rugby players in terms of he's built a clothing brand. He's doing all sorts of cool initiatives. is it something that you feel like people are starting to, with the rise of social media and stuff, and now having this period of time where people have been at home and had to stop? I see TJ's just launched a card business, basketball card business. Do you feel like that's kind of been a turning point for professional sport in terms of people now really starting to take that on board and build moving forward?
Yeah, I think so. I don't think people have really taken it that seriously, that building the brand thing. But like you've seen with Artie and TJ, like these two, they're probably two guys who have really taken it to the next level, and they're probably the two most popular, like famous people, rugby players in New Zealand now, I'd say, along with Bodie and stuff. But what they've done really well is market their brand, like you say, and they're not afraid to put things out there, and they've obviously got huge following, so, and people love them, and they perform on the field, so they've got that massive advantage of other people who haven't got that they can tap into.
Yeah, that's right. Let's go back. Like, it's funny because I probably haven't actually sat down with you and seen you for, I don't know, maybe I think last time I bumped into you was probably 5 years ago or something in Wellington.
At the supermarket.
Yeah, something in Island Bay. But obviously we went to school together and played a little bit of rugby together. And from what I remember, like, it was always your dream. You didn't really have anything else that you wanted to do. Like, you were pretty early on, you were set that you wanted to be a rugby player. Is it funny looking, like, did you think that you'd make it as a professional rugby player?
Well, I always wanted to be a rugby player, but I never really thought I'd be a rugby player. Like, I thought I could potentially make a living off it, traveling around to all sorts of like low division sort of things. And that was sort of when I started to make the first 15 and stuff. But even from a young age, I remember telling my teacher that she said, "What do you want to do?" I said, I'm going to be a rugby player. And people sort of laughed, and I wasn't really sure if I believed it or not. But she asked me if I made the under 16 A Nelson College team, and I was like, no, I didn't. She's like, "Oh, good luck being a rugby player then." And I was like, she's right. Like, how am I going to be a rugby player when I can't even make the A team of our college? And it was like a real moment in my mind where I was like, okay, I'm going to give this a serious go for the next 2 years. If I'm not in the first 15, at one of our players in the first 15 come seventh form, then realistically, I'm not going to be able to be a professional rugby player. So I remember that Christmas, I asked my mum and dad for a gym membership for my birthday and Christmas. And I just went hard because everyone kept saying I was too small. I was a skinny guy, and everyone would say, "Oh, you're too small to be a professional rugby player. You're never going to be big enough or strong enough." And I was like, "Well, how can I fix that?" So I need to go to the gym. So I went to the gym real hard and got strong. Like, I was doing some pretty big weights for like a skinny white guy. And even throughout my whole career, people have always been like, "Oh, well, how did you get so strong?" But it was that off season there where I just like really wanted to give everything, or sort of not give people a chance to not select me. So I knew the things that they were going to say was, "Oh, you're too small, you're not strong enough." So I wanted to get bigger, get strong enough, and then make them say something else about me that for a reason for not picking me, really.
Yeah, because it was, I think when we all finished school and everyone was sort of going off to uni and going their different ways and stuff, you stayed in Nelson and played rugby. And I don't know, I can't remember whether this is true or whether I heard this, but you pretty much just spent like a year, you were just kicking goals, you were down at the gym, you were just like working your ass off after that first 15 year to try and, I don't know if you were contracted at that point or whether you were trying to get a contract with the Marcos, but I remember someone saying that you were just putting in a truckload of work to try and get to that next level. What was that transition like from going out of college? Because you're a really good first 15 year, I remember that. And Nelson College went pretty well, and that kind of probably put you up there. Like, you sort of got some recognition that year. Yeah. What was the transition like into professional rugby, and what was it like when you first got your contract, like your first contract?
Yeah, so after the first 15, so I had made the first 15, and I was captain in my last year, and managed to start making the rep teams and stuff. So I made the Nelson Bays under 18s and things, and then Tasman offered me an academy contract, and I also was in the frame for New Zealand under 19.
Yeah,
so that was like a massive turning point for me, because I was starting to get quite good compared to the Nelson region, but the thought of being in the whole New Zealand, like up there with those sort of players, was sort of something I didn't really feel like I was personally. So when I went to those camps, I was always a little bit like, oh, this is like next level. And I didn't really believe I was good enough. And I think that sort of held me back from making those teams a little bit. And I remember the following year where I had quite a good year with Tasman under-20s team, and I made the New Zealand under-20s camps. And there was like we had to do like a journal of what sort of training we're doing and send it to the coaches. And I remember like going like so hard at this. Like I was like you said, I was like every day I was training probably harder then than I ever have in my career.
Yeah, right.
Like it was like next level. And I was writing it all down. I stopped drinking. I just fully focused on footy for like, it might have been a 6-month build up to the New Zealand 20s. And then I got up to camp and I was like feeling really good, but I still wasn't sure if I was good enough to be with these guys who were all playing sort of ITM Cup at that stage. And there's like some big names like Izzy Dag and things like that were all like already cracked it. And you're like, oh wow, like I don't really feel like I'm at that level, but I've given it everything I could. And I actually had a really bad trial. I don't know why. I think it was because of that. Like I didn't really believe I was good enough.
Yeah,
I remember sitting down with Dave Rennie after the trial where he was telling people whether they'd made it or not. And he just said to me like, mate, I wanted to pick you so bad because the way you handled it, like you're a good guy, and the way you trained so hard for this, I know like you put in the best work with the journal and all that sort of stuff. And then he's like, but you just didn't trial well enough. I can't pick you. And I was like, he's like, I think you'll be a good player, but you just keep working like that. And that really stuck with me because I was like, because it was so honest. It was like I had worked hard. He recognised that, but I didn't play well enough, and that's the thing. I didn't take my opportunity. So it was something that always sticks with me. How he believed that I could be a good player, but I didn't take my opportunity at that time. And next time you get an opportunity, it's just so important to take them. Eh?
Yeah. Have you had? Because that's a really interesting thing. Did you have people between that transition, like parents or mentors, who were telling you what to do in order to make those teams? Like, did you have people that, like coaches and stuff, that were really sort of helping you map out a plan, or was that drive and determination to make it and to put in that extra work and to stop drinking and to really knuckle down? Was that on you, or did you have a good group of people around you helping you with that?
Well, I had the academy, which was obviously a good starting point, but a lot of it was myself. But the biggest influence, the person who's had the biggest influence on me was Andrew Goodman. So he was a PE teacher at the time at Nelson College, and I went to Nelson Rugby Football Club, and he basically took me under his wing from out of college, and he would pick me up. I didn't have a car, so he'd pick me up, take me to trainings, he'd train with me. He was massive. He had a massive influence on me. And then obviously my brother as well, who was a bit younger, but especially when he started coming out of school as well, like we trained pretty hard together, and basically through our whole life we were playing together, like in some sort of form. But the way Goody helped me when I came out of school was massive.
And what about because I guess when you say that self-belief, you sort of had the belief when you were playing college stuff locally that you were good enough, but then obviously you get around guys who have been talked. I think Ryan Crotty and guys like that were in that New Zealand side, so there's some pretty big names. And then it's like that next level and you're questioning whether you belong and stuff. Is that something you've battled with throughout your whole career when you've gone through different environments, or is that something that you've learnt from a mental perspective to, like, have you got tools to deal with that? Because I think in life in general, whether you go for a new job or whether you're starting a business or you're doing a podcast or whatever it is, you kind of always feel inferior, like there's a bit of imposter syndrome when you're starting something. Yeah. Have you got tools to deal with that, or is that something that you've just got better with over time? That's
an interesting one. I think it mainly comes down to just doing it, like getting yourself, like as soon as you get that experience and you realise that, hang on, like I can compete at this level, and like you get so much confidence from that. So and I've been listening to a lot of things, and everyone talks about just doing it, and I think that's it. Like as soon as you get out there and do it, you'll realise whether you're good enough or not pretty quickly. And if you're not, well then no, who cares? Like go out there and do it, and if you're good enough, you'll find out that you're good enough, and you'll learn pretty quickly that you can compete.
Because it can be like a couple of moments that change that day. Like I was talking to Shane Cameron, and he said that one of the things that helped him throughout his entire career was early in his career, he sparred Mike Tyson for, I think it was 6 weeks or 3 weeks. And he went quite well against him and like held his own against Mike Tyson, baddest man on the planet. And he's like, they just threw down and he's like, so after that, like that just took me to another level where I was like, I can go with that guy. It means that he kind of didn't really have any fear going into any other fights, you know, because he'd been there and done that. And that one moment where it was just like a chance opportunity, he got called in, went and did sparring with him and was a main sparring partner, but it really set him up for his entire career because he got so much confidence out of it.
Yeah. I actually remember, I think I was maybe 19 and we had an opportunity to go down to the Crusaders. There was 4 of us. I think it was me, Quinton McDonald, Kay Pokey. He might have even been in the team by then. But there was 4 of us anyway. And we went down for a week to train with the Crusaders. And I was pretty fit at the time. Like I'd done a lot of running and I've always been pretty naturally fit, like more of a like cross-country runner than a rugby player, to be fair. And the Crusaders were doing like this running, I think it was like maybe 5 laps around the field or something, and everyone sort of said, just don't overtake Richie. And I was like, oh shit, okay. Because he was fit, like he had the reputation that he was going to win. And I remember just running behind Richie for like three or 4 laps, and I was like, I wasn't really.
You knew you could take him.
I knew I could take him easy. I was just like too scared to overtake him. And then Khan, who knew me from Tasman, he knew that I was like probably just cruising. He's like, bro, just take him. And then I was like, okay, I'm going to go. And I just took off and like went for it because it went so fast that he couldn't, like, if he tried to keep up, he wouldn't, and just went and just, it was a weird moment because I was like, what was holding me back there? Is it like the fear of, I don't know, I wasn't really sure what it was, but I just thought, yeah, why am I intimidated by overtaking? Why am I scared to overtake him here?
Playing within yourself just to make other people like feel good or like dimming your own light.
Yeah. So it was an interesting moment for me where I just always remember.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. That's a great story, actually. What about your professional career? Like you've travelled and you've played all around the world. You've been in Japan most recently, back in New Zealand. What are some of the best lessons that the game of rugby has given you as a professional?
I've been struggling with my hip for the last couple of years, which has been a massive thing for me. It's been quite tough because it's I want to keep playing, but my body's not really allowing it to. And I know, like, mentally and stuff, I'm probably, my game understanding and communication and things like that are probably at the highest level they've ever been. So I feel I could still add things, but my body just couldn't do what my mind was telling it. So it was a real sort of, I was really struggling with how to go about it. So I ended up just battling on probably 2 years longer than I should have with this hip, which had no range. I was slow, and all these things were like sort of getting to me. Like I remember doing speed testing in Japan where the whole team was watching and they were calling out everyone's times, and my time was honestly the second slowest in the team behind a prop. And I was like, I was coming back to Super Rugby this year, and I was like, oh man, I can't do this. I remember going back to my wife and saying like, oh, we can't go back. Oh, I can't run. Like, it's going to be embarrassing. But anyway, I sort of was hoping that when I got back here, the doctors and stuff could sort of fix it or like inject it or get the pain to go away, and I'd be all right to get through the year. But once I had my scan, they saw pretty quickly that it was pretty stuff.
Time for an operation.
Yeah, surgeon said it was the worst he'd ever seen. So it was pretty bad states.
So how do you deal with that? Like, because what you're saying there is that one of the things that you've learned through rugby is that because you're up against constant adversity, right? Like injuries happen to everyone almost. You're very lucky if you don't spend time on the sideline.
Yeah.
But there's so much in there as well. Like adversity is one thing, and overcoming injuries and stuff, not being picked for teams.
Yeah.
Have you got any situations like that where you've just been knocked around mentally because you haven't been picked for stuff? Aside from that, New Zealand under-19s.
Yeah, so it's been constant throughout my career, really. The first time was obviously when I was trying to get a crack with the Hurricanes. So I was sort of waiting, and I felt like I was ready to go. And then I had an opportunity against the Highlanders when was my first start down there. And I didn't think I played I thought I went okay, but I made a few mistakes, and then the next week I obviously got dropped, and I was like, damn, I've missed another opportunity. So that was sort of dwelling on my mind, and I remember Conrad Smith, he was someone who always gave me confidence. He's always someone who I felt believed in me, and he thought I was hard done by and things like that. And hearing that from him sort of made me feel a bit more comfortable. And then I got another crack a little bit later, and then I ended up staying on after that. So I think other people can have massive influences in those situations, but
it's how you interpretate that as well, because I was talking to a guy a couple of weeks ago, and he said he actually had cerebral palsy and basically was told from an early age that walking and talking were two things that like basically out of the question for him. He's always going to have really impaired speech, and they were like, you'd probably be lucky to walk. And he became a professional sprinter and represented New Zealand at the World Championships 3 times in the Paralympics, and is now a professional speaker. But his thing that he said is like, people don't understand the power of words, and he was like, we throw words around, but like actually words, like one sentence that you say to someone can change their trajectory in a positive or negative way depending on how they interpret it. And he was like, when people told him, he was constantly, his entire life, he was in hospital every day for like the first 7 years of his life, told that he couldn't do things. So it was just, you can't do this, you can't do that. It was just all limitations, and it just made him, he used it as fuel to like prove people wrong. But at the same time, there was like, he had a granddad, I think it was, who always said the opposite and was like, don't worry, mate, like regardless of what anyone says to you, this is the truth, and like you can do whatever you want, and as long as you believe and you work hard and stuff. And those words have literally shaped his life to like being a speaker, traveling all around the world, doing all this other stuff. And like people like Conrad and a few of those guys at pivotal times, Goody, having a few words in your ear at the right time sounds like just had like massive momentum towards you getting that belief.
Yeah, and I think it's all about who you listen to as well, because especially now with social media and stuff. I remember signing back with the Canes, and I made the mistake of going on the Hurricanes like feed, and just like it was abusive, and I was like, oh man, they obviously know.
With just people ripping in.
Just ripping in, because Bodie had gone, and everyone was hoping for like a big replacement, and then they got me, so everyone was obviously pretty gutted. And I remember reading the feed like, oh man, this is like, there's going to be some serious pressure on me this year. And with my hip as well, I was like, because I didn't feel comfortable. Like if my hip was fine, I would have probably been fine with those comments, because I would have been like, okay, well,
but you were feeling
I can show you, but I
already.
also felt pretty nervous about the whole situation. I didn't really feel like I could perform at that level unless something could change with my hip. So I was it was quite tough, and I ended up going completely off social media because I didn't want to read those comments again, because I knew that they're probably affecting me more, because I knew myself that I sort of felt like that as well. So that was quite a tough wee period.
So how do you deal with that? You just obviously block it out and try and block it out, but like, are you someone who uses that as fuel, or like, because people interpret and deal with things in different ways? How do you get through those types of situations?
I felt like I've always used that as fuel before, but at this time I felt like, probably because I didn't feel comfortable with my hip, I felt like I didn't really use it as fuel. I felt like it got to me a little bit because I wasn't comfortable. So previously, if someone had said something bad about me, I'd be like, okay, well, I can show you. Like,
so you had the self-belief.
I had the self-belief that I could do it, but this time around I was like, oh, I'm actually not sure if I can compete either. So I'm not sure if it's a good signing from the Hurricanes. So I sort of believe you, and that's why it's affected me. So.
Yeah, well. So did you, with that injury, like did you keep that quiet when you were in Japan? Like, were you just trying to push through? Because I assume that in rugby, and I don't know this, but I'm assuming that being tough is a badge of honour and getting through, and like, you know, you hear of stories of Richie McCaw playing on a broken foot through the World Cup and all that type of stuff. And do you kind of naturally find yourself falling into that? Were you pushed too far, or were you open about your injuries? And like,
I've been open about it, and so it's been a real gradual process. I had hip surgery, might have been 2013 for a similar thing, basically the same thing on both hips. But it's slowly come back, and it's just got worse and worse in the last 2 years in particular. So even in the UK, I was having a fair bit of problems with it. Then I came back to the Hurricane. I was struggling that year. Like, it got to the point where I couldn't even put on my left rugby. I couldn't touch my, I couldn't get down. So I remember before a game, it was actually the last game in Japan. Boots which went up to the ankle, I'm not sure why I was wearing them because they were my only sprig boots, and it was a real wet day, and I was like, oh man, I'm gonna have to put these boots on, and I couldn't get them on. I had to get my coach and the assistant coach to help me put my boot on, and I was like, how am I playing this? And then I'm going back to the Hurricane year, and I managed to get through that season. I actually dislocated my shoulder first game back, and that was all because of my hip too, because I remember Carmichael Hunt running at me and off the kickoff, and I was so pumped to be back wearing the Canes jersey again. And it was like 2 minutes into my return, I was like, okay, I'm ready for him. I knew he was going to run straight at me. I'd seen him play Origin. And I was like, okay, massive chop tackle here. I've got to go hard. And then because of my hip range, I can't actually bend in the hip.
Couldn't get down there.
So I had to go into like a real ugly position with like real bent back, head down into the ground, and he's got his knee right on my shoulder, and it's just gone pop straight out. So, I mean, my hips affected my whole, like all my injuries have basically come from my hip throughout my career. So, yeah, but like back to your question, I was definitely honest about it, and the coaches knew that I was struggling, but they still thought I could add enough through other areas. Yeah. We had a couple of young 10s as well who they thought I could help out. And if I needed to do the job, I could step in there. And there was 1 week in Africa when Bodie got sick the day before a game. I was actually rooming with him, and I was supposed to play fullback, but he was out, so I had to go into 10. And then we actually won that game. I remember the coach was saying, "Oh, I know that you can do the job when we need you. So even coming back this time, even though my hip was sore, we know we're comfortable that you can do the job if we need you." So.
Yeah, because you add stuff outside of that, right? I think you won team man, like I don't know what the award is, but team man of the year or whatever it is, a few years in a row, which is a pretty amazing honour to have. You've got an awesome bunch of guys there, and obviously that culture is such an important part. To so be acknowledged for something like that is pretty special. But you've brought a lot more, and with your work ethic and the fact that you turn up fit, I think you won all the Hurricanes fitness challenges, just, the surf to coast or whatever it's called.
Yeah, managed to win one once, but won it since.
But, there's a whole bunch of other stuff that you bring, and it's cool that, I guess that's a sign of a good coach, is understanding what people bring outside of just what happens in the 80 minutes on the field, right?
Yeah, and I think one thing with me from that point of view was when I wasn't selected, I always tried to do what's best for the team. So especially those first 2 years when I won those awards, was I wasn't really playing, so it was like, how can I add value to this team by doing something else? And I've never been one to be too bitter about someone else starting ahead of me. I've always tried to think, if they're the best player for the team, that's great. How can I add something somewhere else? And that's always sort of been my mindset. And I felt that especially at the Hurricanes, because that was always a dream to play for the Hurricanes, and to actually be in that situation, I was just like so buzzy. I was so buzzy to be there that I was like, man, what can I do? Like, how can I make this team better? So I was just like, did what I could, and people appreciated it. And
is that because you hear that a lot? People say, "Oh, whatever's best for the team," like when people are dropped and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Is that genuine for a lot of people? Do you reckon? Like, are most guys turning up with that attitude, or because it feels like that's the right thing to say?
Yeah, I would say no. Like I'd say 90%. Like these guys, everyone's so competitive. Like these are the most competitive athletes in New Zealand. Like they're going so hard at each other at training, and I don't genuinely think many people can say that, and that's probably one difference. I remember OTD Black. I feel like he was one person who genuinely was happy that me or Bodie was ahead of him, and because he would say it, and he'd say like, "Oh, you're such a good guy," like, and I really felt like he had my backing, and he'd that sort of thing. So like he's one player that I'd say would genuinely be like that, and I feel sorry for him actually.
He's just got to sit behind Dan and Bodie again.
Yeah, I know. Like, he moves to the Blues for an opportunity, and Bodie follows him up there. But no, he's one player who I'd say does do that.
Yeah. You've had a range of coaches over your time. What stands out from a coaching perspective and from like a leadership perspective? What stands out as qualities that make a difference in a coach? Because there's, good players turn to coaching and they don't necessarily have a good run at coaching. Then there's people who have, not had huge backgrounds as rugby players who come in and become great coaches. In your opinion, what are the characteristics that make someone a really good coach?
Yeah, it's a very good question. And I've had so many coaches and there's been so many bits of each coach which I just think, oh wow, that's why they're good. But then there's other areas of them where I'm like, oh well, they could probably use a bit of him as well to make him like the best coach. But I think it comes down to genuinely caring about the players and building a relationship with them is a key. Being able to talk to them honestly, and then just from the rugby side of things, not copying. Like, I feel like the coaches who get caught out are the ones who have been in an environment and try to just bring that to this environment, or like they know the pattern that they did in 1999 where it was successful, and they're bringing that here now, and it just doesn't work. Where the successful ones are the ones who are thinking, what's something new that we can do that no one else is doing? How can we get ahead? And all these sort of things. So just staying in front of people instead of trying to just copy what. So if you copied like what the All Blacks did last year,
well, you're behind the game.
You're behind the game. So it's like, what are the All Blacks going to do this year, or what could we do this year that is going to have a advantage, or that no one's going to be able to defend against?
What about in terms of building culture and stuff? Look, as you've been again amongst a whole range of different cultures, and both within rugby, but also like where you've actually lived with Japan and New Zealand and places like that. What are the key characteristics of building a good team culture?
Well, I think the best team culture I've been involved in was the Taranaki ITM Cup squad when we actually won it. And because everyone came from out of Taranaki, or a lot of the team actually came from somewhere else, and we all sort of stayed in Taranaki for the season, everyone sort of connected, and everyone was meeting up with each other outside of training, and we had just a real good bond, I felt like, and everyone was comfortable around each other. They could say what they want. Whereas I know living in Japan, it's obviously completely different, where you won't see anyone else. You might see the foreigners, but you won't see anyone else in the team outside of rugby. And even in like London, it was the same sort of thing, because it's such a big place. You can't all meet up for a movie night or something like we were doing in Taranaki, where you could maybe meet up with one or two guys, but any more than that's just far too much of an effort. So, and I think that's sort of a disadvantage for Auckland and things like that.
Those bigger cities.
The bigger cities, like I'm even talking to Billy the other day. He mentioned like he went to catch up with one of the guys, an hour and a half journey to go have a coffee with him, and then an hour and a half back. And it's like, well, in Tasman, where you've got the advantage, pop down the road and catch up with the whole crew, and you get a real sort of good team culture from those connections, really.
So building friendships first and foremost.
That's it.
Yeah. Because it's pretty interesting. It seems like when you look at teams, Scott Robertson is probably someone who springs to mind. He seems like he has the ability to, no matter what team he's coaching, whether it's the New Zealand, under-20s or whatever, or whether it's the Canterbury team or whether it's the Crusaders, he's managed to just pull guys together. And I feel like he doesn't get enough credit, because people say that he's inherited the Crusaders or whatever, but he actually rebuilt them. Like, he had a whole bunch of young guys down there. It was like David Havili and people like that who were coming through in their first seasons, and he managed to create what looked like the tightest team culture. And I think I talked to David briefly once out. It was at the gym or somewhere when I saw him, and he just said like he's just like one of the guys. Like, he gets everyone on a level, and he gets to everyone's level on a personal level, and it's like, that friendship and stuff seems like it's such a big thing, but it baffles me that that's not just like second nature. It baffles me that like all coaches aren't doing that, or that, because it's the same in business as well, right? Like, if you're trying to get unity in a business environment, obviously having everyone having fun at work and enjoying themselves and having their mates there is such a big part of wanting to be there and wanting to work.
Yeah.
But it surprises me that that's not like a big part of every culture.
Yeah, it's interesting. I haven't actually worked with Scott Robinson before, but from all accounts, it's the same as what you're saying. Like, he's just really interested in wanting to know you and being able to connect with you. So I've had some coaches like that, and it definitely makes a big difference. Yeah, and I think that's a big part of it. I remember when Mark Hammett came into the Hurricane, and he sort of had a bit of a clear out of some pretty big names and stuff. Like he was very good at connecting.
Was he?
Yeah. So he made your partners, your wives and family feel so welcome.
Right.
And it was very good at connecting with people. And unfortunately, he didn't really get the results. But I think what he did sort of led up to that. Yeah, exactly. Laid the foundation for the success that we had later on.
Yeah, because he came in and did all the hard yards,
Exactly.
and then just copped it.
Yeah.
He because what are some of the guys? Who are some of the best leaders that you played alongside?
Well, Conrad Smith's probably my favourite. Like, just the way he approached the game, he was smart. Like, could communicate, his work ethic, all these things. Like, he's someone you'd follow, like no matter what. And
yeah,
you trust. I trusted him, and everyone trusted him. Even guys like TJ now, like he has a massive influence on the Hurricanes. Like, he's probably the most influential player that I've played with in terms of a team environment. Just what he does off the field.
Yeah. So why is he so influential? Is it just like the passion? Because he's obviously passionate. You see that oozing out of him.
Yeah.
But what makes him so influential?
Well, he's obviously a very good player, and he drives a lot of our game. But he also does a heap of work with the strategies and things like that. His training, he's constantly out on the field. And the young guys who come and see that, and they want to be like him. And he's just at the next level. He's so competitive. Yeah, and if someone steps out, he's probably the closest thing to Jordan. Like without in terms of that environment, like that competitive nature, not just so wanting the team to win, not to that extent of Jordan. Like he's not a dick, but he's that influential, I feel.
Yeah, because you can sort of see it. He wants to fight for everything, and like I'd imagine, even does he rough people up at training, and he'd be competitive in every environment by the looks of it.
Yeah, he gets into a fair bit of biffo at training.
What about what's it like when you're running into like semi-finals or the finals of the Hurricanes? That was a big moment in your career, winning that that year. And what's it like in those big pressure moments? Are you nervous? Are you excited? Like, how do you deal with the occasion? Because you've already touched on it. You said like in those early stages of your career, you maybe struggled to step up to the plate when it mattered.
Yeah.
But I feel like in those moments, you probably got the best out of yourself as a player in a lot of those bigger moments at Super Rugby and stuff. What's it like running out in those environments, and how do you cope with that?
Yeah, it's always a bit of anxiety leading up to the game. I'm always really nervous leading up to it. I like to get out of the house. I hate being around my wife or family around the day of a big game, because it's just like, oh, how you feeling? Like, oh, you feeling okay? You're ready to go? I'm like, I don't really like that stuff, so I go to the stadium pretty early and just usually have a wee nap at the stadium and stuff. But once I'm out on the field, I know I'm fine. So that's always been the thing. So as soon as I'm on the field, like, you just forget everything, and that's always been the case. But it's just how to handle that emotion leading up to it, not overthinking it, not playing the game before you're actually out there. Trying to keep your thoughts positive, not negative. Like especially at Westpac, I always felt like when you look out the window and you see the wind and rain, it's very easy to start thinking, oh shit, I'm in for a night here at fullback. Like this could be a tough night. Like start getting negative thoughts like, oh, I'm not actually that good under the high ball. There's going to be a lot of them. It's swirling. These sort of thoughts. So I always try and keep those thoughts positive. But
so do you just if you have those thoughts, are you just switching them out for positive stuff? Are you like, is that something that you consciously do, or?
Yeah, I'll just try and basically just say, don't worry about that. Like, try and swap it with something positive, and then always try and remind myself that once I'm out on the field, it's going to be all right. Like when it starts getting to the point where nerves are taking over, like just remember, as soon as you're out on the field, you're going to be sweet. So like, why are you worrying about it now, sort of thing. So, but some of those build-ups to the finals was pretty special. There's some massive games, and like running out when the stadium's packed, there's like such a cool feeling. Like there's so much energy you get from games like that. And there's some really cool experiences.
What do you think, because it sort of follows on from that, but in the moment, it seems like the best players, or the players that have the ability to perform at their best consistently, are the ones who have like the shortest memories.
Yeah.
Like I've watched young kids, and it's not just in sport, but like who, you miss a tackle and then they spend like the next 10 minutes beating themselves up because they missed a tackle, and therefore they're not present with the plays that are happening or what's going on. And that's relevant to like business when you make a mistake or anything else and you spend too much time dwelling on it instead of just putting it in the past. But guys like Richie McCaw and stuff like that seem to be able to miss a tackle and it just didn't even feature in their thinking. Yeah. Is that a learnt skill? Like, is that something that you guys get taught? Is that because it's you have to be very present in that moment, and it's such a hard. I just feel like that's, in terms of life in general, that's such a valuable skill to have. But it seems like at professional sport, the guys that can do that all the time are by far and above the ones who perform most consistently.
Yep, I know, 100% agree with that. And we do have mental skills coaches who try and teach you this stuff, but it's a very hard thing to teach, I think. Like, once you're conscious of it, it obviously helps in trying to get those thoughts out. But I mean, probably the best person at it's Bodie Barrett. Like, I've never felt like he was ever flustered. Like, he could miss some kicks or like miss a tackle and something, and he just would not look phased at all. And like next play, intercept, try 80 meters or something. Like, he was the pinnacle at not getting flustered, I felt. So sometimes he said like he would be
under pressure.
like especially if he missed a few kicks and had a kick to win or something. Like, I remember one against the Highlanders, I think it might have been last year, right on full time, sort of like 25 out right in front, like the one that everyone says, oh yes, everyone's celebrating early, and he's like, my legs are like shaking. But you look at him and you're like, man, like he's so calm here.
Seems ice cold, yeah.
He's just he did.
Because I remember with Bodie, one of the most impressive things from him was, I can't remember if must have been the season before last, and he had a bit of a bad run. It might have been last season, a bit of a bad run, and he played really poorly and was just getting absolutely slated in the media. He'd gone from being like hero to the villain in like the space of a week.
Yeah.
And then they played Australia, and I was like, man, I hope that he steps up and just has an awesome game and shuts everyone up. And I think he scored 4 or 5 tries and just had like an absolute blinder. Yeah. But people are so quick to jump on and absolutely slam someone, even of Bodie, who's like so loved by the whole country. Like, it can change in the space of a week. That must be really difficult to deal with.
And especially at that level, like, obviously I haven't been an All Black, but you can see at that All Black level, it's just so much more intense. Like you say, 1 or 2 bad games and everyone's jumping off your ship and pretty quick to start bagging you. And again, like you say, as soon as you have a couple of good games or one good game, man, everyone's straight back on you, loving you, and you're the talk of the. So it hasn't been quite that to those sort of levels for me at the Hurricanes and stuff. I haven't really. I've always sort of been a player who's been under the spotlight. I felt like, especially my years 2015, 2016, the years where I had a lot of consistent game time. I was basically the only non-All Black in the team or non-international in the team. So we had so many good players around me that I was never really in those sort of spotlights. No, I don't. If you told someone to name the team, I don't think many people would name me in those sort of teams. So I was sort of that player who I felt like put some pieces together, but was never up on the glory board or whatever, which I was comfortable.
Do you feel like you got the most out? Do you feel like you got the most out of yourself as a player?
I think so, because I was, my strengths are very different to other players, and I could have easily had a career where I never got an opportunity because no coach would have given me that chance, because it wasn't until I got my chance where people could see what I could add, and a lot of that was around things that people don't see. Like when you watch a game, like, I mean, as a young kid, I wouldn't like watching me as a player. Like, I'm not big, fast, or strong. Like, I'm one of those guys who works hard, communication, decision-making. Basically my role at the Hurricanes was to give Bodie the best comms that I could to make him the best player he could be. And I was happy with that role. I loved playing with Bodie because I knew his skill set was so good that if I told him there was space in that right corner, it didn't have to be much space, but I know that he could execute that kick to hit that right corner. And then when he had hit that, I know no one else would see that, what I'd said or anything like that.
The team knows.
No, maybe not even the team, but I knew myself, and I was like, those were the moments where I'll be like, oh, that was awesome play. Like,
yeah, that's cool. That's really cool, because I feel like a lot of young guys, and it's almost that's almost a strength. Like, if you can find out, because everyone wants to be big and fast, and everyone wants to be flashy like Bodie, and everyone wants to play number 10. And that. But if you can early on identify those other strengths and really build on those, surely that puts you in a better position to actually make it.
Yeah, I think that was one of my strengths, was my self-awareness of knowing what I was good at and knowing what I wasn't good at. So I never tried to overplay my hand by running the ball. Like, if I've got Julian Severe outside me and I've caught the ball at fullback, I'm going to pass it to Julian, because I know who I'd rather tackle out of me or Julian if I'm coming forward. So, I mean, those decisions are easy for me, and I think that's where a lot of people get caught up in, where they think that they need their moment to, and it's hard when you're trying to get selected or keep your spot. You feel like you need something to prove, so it can be quite hard where you think, I need to do something, but a lot of the time doing something is not doing something or doing the right thing. And I think that's where a lot of, especially young players, get caught up in. And as soon as you have players who are starting to think for themselves, or like just wanting to do things for their glory, that's where you get unstuck.
Yeah, ego's got to have a big role in that, though. Eh?
Massive role. And you know the players who have the egos and need that ball. And yeah, some are really good at it, and some need the ball because
some are good enough to demand it.
Yeah. If I'm demanding the ball, we're in trouble.
But I feel like that's a really good point for a lot of young guys, because you can prove so much more by, like you said, self-awareness is a big part of it, playing to your strengths, but identifying who those players are and being able to set them up to be the best that they can be, that's an incredibly important role to a winning team. But it feels like when you're a young guy coming through, like, you're always trying to be that guy who's a superstar, but you don't necessarily need to be.
No, exactly, and that's sort of what I meant by that. And I think every team sort of needs players who are willing to sacrifice themselves. I remember probably the Crusaders. I never played with Ruben Thorne, but I heard that that's sort of like what he was like, because I mean, he used to get a real hard time from the media and stuff. Everyone said he was like Mr. Invisible, like you wouldn't see him on the field, but everyone who he played with loved him, so he must have been doing something right. And I'm guessing that was sort of his sort of role in the team as well.
Yeah, you don't make it to All Black captain being a bad player. So.
Yeah, exactly.
That's cool. So what about just go back to the injury thing for a bit, because I feel like that's like, obviously you're experiencing it right now, but guys like who you've been around a lot, like Nehi, Milner-Skudder, there's some people around you who have had some pretty bad runs of injury and stuff. What about the mental health side of things within rugby? Because I feel like it's a big tough man sport, but you experience so much adversity, like more than the average person, and you're under more pressure than the average person, and everything's more public. What about mental health within the sport? Because it feels like the All Blacks turned a page with the World Cup and the way Steve Hansen dealt with it, and he kind of opened up a space where it was all right and it showed players crying in the changing rooms, and it felt like a bit of a shift within the culture of New Zealand rugby when Steve Hansen exited, and he almost made a point of that.
Yeah.
What's your experience of that? Because you go through some bloody tough times, and it's very public.
Yeah, and I think there's actually been a massive change in sort of the last 2 years around those sort of spaces. It's becoming more open. Guys are connecting on a more deeper level, especially. I've noticed it from leaving the Hurricanes and then coming back the 2 years later, that guys are actually talking about things they weren't talking about before, and willing to catch up after a game, like in the room in the hotel, and get into quite deep conversations around that sort of stuff. So I think in that space, there's been a massive growth. But when you talk about injuries, obviously, like you said, everyone gets injured at some point, and how you deal with those injuries is a massive part of your career, because you can either let them get to you and come back not quite the player you were, or you can look at it as a challenge to get better and use that time for other parts or areas of your game where you can improve. So some guys just have some rotten luck. Like Nehi's a perfect example, man.
Yeah.
he's one player I just love to see out there, and I'm stoked that he's signed with the Highlanders. I hope he can some games because, man, he's a talent. And but, yeah, just rotten luck of injuries, and I'm not sure if you can do much about that. You can only prehab so much, and it's a contact sport. People are going to get hurt, especially when you're built like a racehorse. He's like super explosive, and yeah, it's just an unfortunate part of the game, really.
Yeah, it is. Just has Artie, it seems like, just going back to that depth of the mental health stuff and the ability to kind of open up those conversations, have those deeper conversations, has Artie been a leader in that space for the Hurricanes? Because he seems like, in general, he's kind of changing the perception of a rugby player a little bit.
Yeah, he's been massive in so many areas of the game. Like growing his brand was one thing we talked about earlier, but the mental side too. Like he's set up a group where guys go and have chats, have these deeper chats. Guys are loving it, and he's been a massive part of that shift. Like he's someone that's so influential. Like if it was someone else who started something like that, it could have
the same impact.
Exactly. So everyone respects Artie, everyone follows him. So if there's something like that, he's a perfect person to sort of open people's eyes and get him to follow.
What's your advice to a young guy out there who is potentially coming towards the end of their college career now, or has just finished that college and wants to make it in professional sport, but is maybe having those doubts and stuff? Like what does it take to make it as a professional rugby player? What advice would you give to someone who's, I guess, 10 years behind?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think you've got to be willing to sacrifice something. So depending how much you want it, like if you really want to be a professional rugby player, I can promise you can be a professional rugby player, but you're just going to have to make sacrifices to get there. So no matter on your ability, obviously ability helps, but if you really want it, you can learn all the skills to be a rugby player. You're just going to have to sacrifice more to get there, and it might be a bit of a longer journey. It might be sort of 4 or 5 years and not straight out of school and then you start thinking, am I wasting my time? So just having the belief that you're good enough, being willing to work hard, make sacrifices, and listen to the right people.
Yeah, that's a big, the last one's a big point. Going on to that, do you believe, obviously talent is one thing, do you genuinely believe that you can build yourself into the person that you need to be? How much of that's physical and how much of that's mental?
As a rugby player?
Yeah.
I genuinely think that you can become a rugby player. Obviously, talent, if you can't catch a tennis ball, you're probably not going to be able to be a professional rugby player. Like if you can't just throw it up to yourself or things like that, or if you never played rugby.
There's a certain level.
There's a level, but if you're a first 15 player, I believe that you could become a professional rugby player.
What about from the mindset side of things then? What advice would you give? Because I'm just thinking of people that I know who have got those aspirations and are probably at a point where you're about to chuck it in. Like I feel like after college there's a massive drop off in terms of people. Like if they haven't got named in a team, then they kind of chuck it in and go and do something else, or the real world catches up with them. They've got to go and get jobs, and it becomes harder to be as focused. And so there's a big drop off after like 18.
Yeah.
But if you can stick through that period, you give yourself a far better shot. It's like I feel like everyone sort of jumps off the bridge at the same time.
Yeah, and I understand that because obviously you've got to start making money, and you've got a life to live, and you can only chase your dream for so long, really. But if you are willing to make that sacrifice and chase that dream, I think you will be able to get the benefits out of it.
Yeah, it's good for anyone out there to know, because I know
still hope.
There's still hope, mate. I'm going to pull the boots back on. I reckon I got one season left in me. Maybe at hooker. I guess I'm interested to know, what are the qualities in the exceptional players that you've been around? Are there common themes that make them so much better? We've already talked about the ability to kind of have a short memory and be present, but like, what about things off the paddock, like goal setting and like having a vision? Because I talked to Sione Faumuina a few episodes ago, and he said that like one of his last seasons that he played with the Warriors was like the first time he'd ever set goals.
Yeah.
And he was a freak of a talent. Yeah. And it just felt like probably didn't get the most out of himself because just didn't focus on getting the most out of himself. But he said as an organisation, they hadn't really set goals. And to me, who's never been in that professional environment, that seems absolutely insane that you wouldn't have kind of goals and values as a team that you're all buying into, and then as an individual. On that side of things, off the paddock, are there guys, like, what have you learned on that side of things? Are you someone who sets goals vigorously, and is that how you're driven, or how does that work?
Yeah, I've always been a big goal setter personally, and all the teams that I've been involved in have always sort of set a goal. So from that side of things, I find that quite weird that the Warriors had never talked about or set goals. It's hard to know what other players are doing because you don't really talk about it. It's not like we all sit down together and set our goals together. It's we do our team thing, and then you sort of do your own thing by yourself. So from that side of things, I don't really know who's
who does
the
what
way in that sort of sense. But
so what do you do? Do you set them like per season? Do you have goals for the season? Do you like how far in advance are you thinking? Like, what's your process around that?
Yeah, I usually set one for the season. I set a few for the season, and then a few more short term, depending how I'm going, and what sort of situation. Obviously, like, you can set a goal for the season and then get injured, and obviously that's gone. So you're just adjusting your goals and making little short term goals and things like that.
Do you use tools like visualization and stuff? Do you visualize much?
I don't like sit down and visualize, but as I like before a big game and things, I try and make all those visualizations positive. Like naturally negative visualizations come into my mind, but I try and swing them around to, catching that swirly high ball.
Yeah, scoring in the corner.
Yeah,
it's a funny one because it's real hard to do. It's a skill, and it's like you've got to put the repetitions in to get good at creating those visions. But I remember when I had my first boxing fight, all I could think about was getting knocked out. Yeah. And like on the day, I was like, oh my gosh, I'm going to go in and get knocked out in front of all my friends and family. Yeah. And like, it was just a constant battle of knowing that I shouldn't be allowing those thoughts, but then like, how do I turn them off?
Did you get knocked out?
No, I didn't. But I had an injury going into it. I'd hurt my neck. And so like my neck was literally couldn't move a couple of days before, and I'd been to a chiropractor and I had a bunch of painkillers. And I think that played into it as like you with your injury where you're like, well, maybe my ability's not what it actually should be.
Yeah.
I sort of had that. But I feel like as you spend more time in it, then you get better at creating those positive visions. Are there any guys that sort of, because I feel like a lot of those top NBA guys and stuff like that, they speak openly about how much they visualize, and even like law of attraction type stuff where they're like constantly trying to pull the positive stuff in, and they kind of feel like time hasn't caught up. Are there guys in New Zealand rugby who are leading the way in that side of things? Or is it you just don't know?
I just don't really know, but I do know that like the most successful players are genuinely the ones who are out there working harder than the other ones. I mean, that's one thing that I've struggled with my hip throughout my career is I've felt like I haven't really been able to do the extra work that I've been wanting to, and even from probably the age, or just before my first hip operation, where I was like, is so sore to, like, as soon as I come off that field, to do an extra kicking session or something, it's just not worth it for the pain that I'd have the next day on my hip. So, and in the last 3 years especially, like as soon as training's been finished, I've been straight off that field, and it's not something I've liked doing, but it's something I felt like I've had to do, and I feel like you sort of get judged for being like that first guy off the field, or not doing your lower weights, but I just like felt like I couldn't do it, and it wasn't doing me any good because it was doing me more harm than good. But when you see the results, that the guys who are doing the extra work, the TJs and things like that, who are staying out for hours after training, passing, doing whatever, they're the ones who always will make it to that elite level. And like, there's no question, there's no guy who's stayed at training that much later and not made it. Like, there's no one who's given that extra effort, that worked that much harder than everyone else and not managed to kick on, or like been unlucky. They've always seemed to be the ones.
Yeah, it makes total sense. It's like so many stories of guys like Kobe Bryant and stuff who, dude's rocking in 3 hours before a game and he's already there shooting from the free throw line.
Yeah.
He's got a broken arm and he's there shooting at 5 a.m. with one arm. And just
next level way.
Yeah. How do you balance the pressure of professional sport and just having a personal life? Like, do you, because I feel like even with guys like you're talking about, guys like TJ and stuff who are on all the time, they're doing all the extras, obviously just so passionate about it. What's the balance there between that? Because I feel like having a good quality of life off the field makes you a good player on the field as well.
Yeah. And I think having a family was a massive thing for me. Like as soon as we had Ollie, who's now 4, that was a massive thing for me to just switch off, go home, see him, play with him. And being a dad's just been like, it's been one thing that I've always wanted to be. And I just love it so much that I just love playing with the kids. I'm out in the go. I'm struggling at the moment in the crutches. The boys don't really know what's going on. But, just as soon as I'm back from training and stuff, I'm out with them and just fully switched off from.
Yeah, that's cool. It's important, eh? What, I guess just sort of, wrapping up, we've been talking for a fair while, but just for anyone out there particularly young people out there who, it doesn't have to be about professional sport, but got dreams and ambitions, I feel like a lot of the time they're squashed pretty early, like high school, the careers advisors, like those types of things are always putting a ceiling on what you can and can't achieve. And the reason I like sitting down and talking with people like you is because your dream was to be a rugby player. You went out and you're living your dream as a professional rugby player. And I don't think there's anything better that you can go out and do than fulfill what you always wanted to do. But I do feel like it's you going against the grain when you're doing it, which I don't think should be the way. No. What's your advice to people out there who are trying to make life decisions at the moment or have maybe got some ambitions, doesn't have to be sporting wise, from having lived the last 10 years, doing what you wanted to do?
Yeah, well, I had so many people tell me that I'll never be able to be a rugby player. And if when I said earlier, when I said it, people would laugh. And I'm not really sure. I guess it's just don't listen to them or listen to the right people. Listen to yourself. If you believe that you can do it, just go out there and do it and like give it a full crack. Like have no regrets. Like if you really want to do something, just go out and then do it and then see what happens. Like as soon as you start questioning yourself or second guessing, then that's when things are going to get harder.
Yeah. What's the highlight of have you got a highlight of your career?
Obviously winning the Super Rugby is probably the biggest thing, but also winning the ITM Cup with Taranaki was probably the best I felt after a game. Like when we won the Super Rugby, I'm not really sure. I was expecting to have a heap of like emotion of like happiness, but I didn't really get it. It was sort of just relief more than anything. Probably because we didn't win the year before, lost to the Highlanders, and that was pretty gutting. But when we beat the Lions, it was when that game finished. I don't know. It was just sort of like, oh, thank God that's happened and we've won it and it's over. And it wasn't really like a yes, this is awesome. It was like I'm not really sure why. I was expecting a lot more, out of it. But when we won it with Taranaki, obviously that was against Tasman, and that was the most intense sort of, so much niggle, abuse, and like chat on the field. That was. I've never been that fired up in a game in my life.
Really?
Like, I had a shocking game. I was just like so emotionally wound up, and there was so much niggle going on. There's so much chat of like abuse, and it was
that specifically towards you because ex-Tasman or like what?
Definitely towards me, but I'm not sure if it was. It was probably a little bit to do with ex-Tasman. I knew a lot of them. My brother was playing. He didn't talk to me for a couple of weeks.
Really?
There were some things said which I'll probably regret, but and just remember like everyone just into it. Like I remember a penalty early on in the game, and everyone was just like coming in, like trying to fight and stuff. Everyone was so in the red, and the crowd was so massive and on top of us that there was just so much energy, and I think everyone's emotions in that whole game got the better of them, but we came out on the right side. Yeah,
that was pretty cool. You were captain for that as well, weren't you?
Yeah. So it was pretty.
Yeah, that's pretty awesome. When you're in those moments, because like the emotion thing, that's a pretty important thing to touch on as well, because when you're running hot like that, you don't necessarily get the best out of yourself.
Yeah, and I feel like I probably haven't played as well as I could have in finals before, and you see some players who, like you said, are just so consistent in those key big moments, and they've just got their emotions so under control, and you see it in league with guys like Cam Smith and Jonathan, etc. where they don't ever look.
They're just on one level.
Exactly, and they not. It doesn't look like they're angry or ever too emotional about it, and just looks like another game or everyday game where my mindset definitely wasn't that. Like I was playing in a final in front of 30,000 people, just like so wired up. Like I think I took a fair bit of learning out of that, just to try and keep it as another game. Like it is just another game, but there's just a bit more riding on it.
What's your perspective on you moving into sort of another phase or setting up for another phase of your life now, where potentially you might play a bit more rugby, but you obviously with COVID and with your injury and everything, you're sort of looking at the next phase. What does that look like for you? You've talked about coaching and stuff like that. Do you have ambitions to be in coaching?
I've always felt like coaching sort of been my calling more than playing, to be honest. And if I didn't have a family and a wife, I would 100% be going down the coaching dream, chasing that. But the thing with the coaching is that you're still living that rugby player lifestyle where you're moving around. And I mean, we have, as a family, we haven't stayed in the same place longer than a year and a half, and that was when we moved to London. And every 6 months, other than that, we've been moving around. So we've moved to Italy, now Taranaki, Wellington, and things like that. Japan, Wellington. So as a family, my boy starts school next year. We're so keen to just settle down somewhere and find a base. So if it wasn't for that, I'd love to be a coach, but I'm not going to chase the coaching dream by moving around. If a coaching job opportunity came up where I was, then I'd 100% jump at that and would love to do that. But if anyone from Tasmania is listening,
yeah, sign them up. Yeah, I guess values change over time, and
exactly, and it's the priority now. I've had my time living my dream and doing my thing, so I feel like now's the time to let the kids settle down and live a good life and stop moving them around, because it does get pretty hard on them.
Yeah, nice. Oh, you're a good man, Jimmy. Hey, I've appreciated chatting, man, and just want to wish you all the best for your rehab and for whatever's next. I personally hope that you get back out on the field and have a run around. I've always enjoyed supporting you and watching you play. I know that having known you from when we were at high school, that rugby was always the dream, so it's pretty awesome to chat to you and that sort of full circle thing. And it's just, yeah, I hope that the next phase goes really well for you, bro.
Yeah, cheers, mate. Thanks for having me on, and hopefully we can have sort of the 9-10 combo next time we're out there.
That was probably the chubbiest number 9 you've ever seen.
You had a good pass, though.
Cheers, mate.
Cheers, mate.
So there you have it, guys. That was the interview with James Marshall. That was a really cool conversation for me because James and I were friends at high school and we played a lot of rugby together in college, and it was always his dream to go out there and make it as a professional rugby player. So to sort of get the opportunity to sit down with him and have that conversation 10 years down the track and reflect on his journey from college right through to playing professional rugby here in New Zealand and also abroad, it's just a really cool conversation. I've got a lot of respect for anyone who goes out there and chases their dream, and there's a lot of valuable insights in there for any young guy in particular who wants to go out there and make it in professional sport. So I hope you found value in that. If you did, please share it out with anyone that you think would enjoy listening to it, and feel free to follow James on Instagram. It's at James Marshall. He's actually just launched his own podcast called the What a Lad Podcast, which is James sitting down and having conversations with some of the best lads that he's met through his playing days, and talking about all things professional sport, and also diving into some of the antics they get up to off the field. So give that one a listen and check that one out. Like I said, share that out with anyone that you think would get value from it, and I look forward to connecting with you in the next episode.